Good morning. I'm Barry Carr. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Continence Foundation of Australia. Could I please ask you to take your seats? And we'll get the morning underway. I'd like to formally welcome you all to the launch this morning of the 2013 World Continence Week, and thank you for braving this cold winter morning here in Melbourne. Our next speaker is Pino Migliorino. Please welcome Pino. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barry. Cahill. Sorry, I just thought I'm going to pick up from there. If we can't laugh at stuff, then we shouldn't be around. Can I just say how impressed I am with Beth Wilson? In my older ages now, I started off in this area as a kid, and I always felt like a bit of a firebrand as a kid. Now, as I get older, I think the one thing I can actually do is be really confident and be able to say the absolute most controversial and do it with a smile, and no one knows what to do with it. So you just have to be out there and push the boundaries. I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting this morning. It's a beautiful morning in Melbourne on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I do pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd like to acknowledge obviously the Minister, and can I echo Barry's comments. I've been around governments now for far too long. And there's a rare diamond in this government, and it's Mark Butler, and I've had a lot of dealings with him. And if the government is not returned, he'll be a huge loss to us, and I hope we keep him close to us in whatever way we can. The stuff he's been able to do. And just to put it in a nutshell, and I'll refer to it later on, 12 months ago he attended a meeting or a conference organised by the Centre for Aging, called Aging, I think, sorry if I got the name wrong, and he spoke, and that's the first time I met Rowan as well, and he basically said, I want us to have a policy structure by the end of the year, and he told his department to their dismay that they'd not only had to do it for that, they also had to do it for GLBTI communities. He's a mover and a shaker, and I just think I need to acknowledge him well. I also want to acknowledge the fantastic work of the Continence Foundation. And I think this is really important in terms of what I'm doing today. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about communicating health issues to ethnic communities. It is not just translating. It is not just putting out a pamphlet. It has to be a process of actually understanding people, understanding how we segment our society, where people are from, how long they've been here. And you don't do it quickly. And what I'd like to do is start commending this process, because this is the culmination of a process which didn't happen a few weeks ago to spend pre-budget dollars or pre-end of financial year dollars. This happened for years now as one of the ongoing priorities. So it actually has been based on engaging with the various communities, undertaking research, holding forums, and if you like, what's happened is it's actually developed. So what you're seeing today is a product of a process, and the process is really important. The approach, it epitomises what I believe is so important about public health and what we need to do. And we need to actually understand in what we're doing the nature of the society and the community we're working with. We don't nearly do that enough. And again, I'd like to fit into what the Minister said in his presentation in terms of the need to understand that in today's Australia, if you don't deal with diversity, you are not dealing with Australians. It is so very important we understand that we can no longer consider that there is one type of client for our services, one type of person we are communicating with. That is no longer the case. We need to actually understand diversity, and in understanding diversity, it needs to affect how we see the world, how we plan for it, how we develop our services, and how we actually engage. And I'd like to commend the referenced policy structure that the Minister talked about, which is the National Called Ageing and Aged Care Strategy. So I want to now move to the Continence Foundation. First met 12 months ago. And what they clearly said to me is, we're committed to this area and we want to be able to do something. And they didn't just, again, do a pamphlet. They already had pamphlets. You didn't have to, actually. But what was really interesting is it needed to be a strategic approach. And I think any time you're starting to talk about health communications, it needs to be strategic. because unless it's strategic, it's just going to fall foul. It needs to be targeted, it needs to be relevant, and it needs to be supported. And I think that's what's really important about these types of issues, because what needs to happen is that you can no longer have a cookie-cutter approach to health communications. It can no longer be, here are 4 organisations we send information to, or we package it up and we do translated information and we send it off to the migrant resource centres. Because you know what happens at the migrant resource centres? They've got a room that they get the boxes they get that week and store them, and then they take away the boxes from last year, and these boxes keep on being replenished and replenished and replenished, because the reality is the pamphlets aren't communication. If you are going to do pamphlets, it's got to be articulated as part of a strategy. It's got to be activated by who you're engaging. And quite often when I do speak to those coordinators of those migrant resource centres, they say, you know, we could probably have done a lot more on this issue, but the problem is no one actually talked to us. We just received the box with a letter saying, you know, please distribute. They weren't engaged in the process. And the reason I'm harking on that a little bit is I think what we need to do is understand the theory of communications in health. If you look at health communications across the board, it is an area that we have great expertise and understanding. And my challenge is to talk to people about applying those same expertises in a health marketing sense to ethnic communities. And the very way you do this is to actually start thinking about the issue. You think about the issue and then you consider its relevance to the diverse communities. So in this case, continence, incontinence. Who is it most relevant to? Well, in thinking about it, you'd say, okay, older people in that ageing process. Even though it's not a natural part of ageing, it is more likely to occur in older people. Then you consider, okay, if it's older people and we're looking around our communities, what does the older cohort look like? Well, the reality is it's looking increasingly diverse. The post-war migrant wave, and you've got to consider, last year was the first year that the baby boomers got a pension. Last year they turned 65. And everyone's going, oh my God, the baby boomers are ageing. What is that going to mean to our services? What it means is, taking another step, is when they were born, we were bringing in migrants at very large numbers who were not 1 or 2, who were 15, 20, 25, 30 years of age. The working age men and women who came to Australia in the post-war period. They are now in their age cohort. That wave of post-war migrants is now not 65, but 75 and 85. We actually need to refocus on what we're talking about. So when we talk about continence or incontinence and we're talking about older communities, we have to talk about older people. The data speaks for itself. I can quote to you, by 2021, 1 in every 3 people will be born overseas in a non-English speaking country who speaks a language other than English. That's important. That's important in terms of big numbers. It's also important in terms of our understanding that the nature of migration means that that is going to be different in terms of different communities. So while the overall Australian population has a 65 plus cohort of what is 14% right now, in the Italian community, the Italian-born community, that cohort is 52%. Okay? So you've just got to consider, if we're going to do stuff around older people, we have to do it around poor. The other big issue around continence and incontinence is maternity, a very big issue. Australia, you're going to love it. I love figures and I try. And you know, the funny thing is I can tell you anything and you won't know enough to actually say I'm right or wrong, or I'm making it up. But it's true. Australia's birth rate is 1.8 kids per family, just over the maintenance level. All right, that's important. But if I show to you that if I overlay ethnicity or recency of arrival, that birth rate is going to be 3.2% in Arabic-speaking families, 3.4% in African families. Again, when we're talking about younger people having children in a maternity sense, we have to again consider diversity. So, the first conclusion from my strategic approach is that continence is highly relevant to ethnic communities because they overscore, not just as natural parts of the community, but they overscore in the 2 areas where they're most important to this issue. The second issue around communications is, yes, we've established relevance. Now, The next stage is probably the one that I'm going to refer to Beth, the sensitivity. The sensitivity. Is this something we can talk about? And this is where it's really interesting around health communications, because the nature of the approach has to be bedded in where we are on the issue. So I say a lot about ethnic communities that there's really a continuum of health issues. The one which is easiest to do is something which says, immunise your children. And everyone says, yes, of course, because we all love our children. So in terms of communication, I can be didactic. I can say, immunise your children, and this is how, and this is where you go. And I'll get high-level compliance, because I'm hitting the cultural button that says, we love our children. We want to make sure they're safe. Okay? The next part of this continuum might be a little bit more complicated. Let's talk about, say, communicating better health and obesity. Should be easy enough. And then all of a sudden, when you start overlaying ethnicity, you go, well, if we're talking obesity, we're talking food. Yeah? We're talking lifestyle, we're talking culture. We start to actually have to consider what is going to be the impact of communicating healthy eating if indeed we don't modify our messages to start saying, what do you eat? What is the relevance of the food proportions if your staple diet is rice as opposed to bread? That type of, and so what we now need to do is start to say, okay, to what extent is that health communication message something that has to be crafted around the communities? Because if you're a Pacific Islander and you are of a certain size, you're not overweight, you're normal. No, I'm serious, they're normal. If you're this, you're not. So in terms of this notion of what we want to achieve in terms of that, we have to work within a specific cultural paradigm. So we take our messages and we modify them and we actually make them relevant. That's, if you like, the middle range. And then we get the really hard stuff. Really hard stuff. Dementia, mental health, sexuality issues, really hard stuff. And we think, okay, how do we then communicate that? I can't be didactic because I'll force the community. I can't just take a message and reorient it because the message is pertinent to that community. Then I have to start to understand and say, I have to be able to work with that community in such a way as that the issue starts getting addressed from inside the community and grows out. So you've got this continuum from didactic to, if you like, organic from inside the community where you actually start to get change within that community. That is health communications and ethnic communities. It's easy if you think about it. It is hard if you don't think about it, because unless you understand the nature of the issue, the sensitivity of the issue, what you do might be a total waste of money and time. So, is that what's happening here today? Absolutely not. And that's what's so positive about this. So when we start to talk about then continence, we are dealing in that area of sensitivity. But it happens in different areas, and I've got to tell you a little bit of an anecdote. My company does communications and research, and it's a Melbourne-based anecdote, which is quite funny. There was a council here which wanted to build a 2,000 birth mausoleum. They did it. And I'm not going to mention who they were. And they came to us prior to doing it because they wanted to do some market analysis. They wanted to actually have a sense of if they were to build it, would they come? That was a reference. You're supposed to laugh there. If they were to build it, would they come? So when I mentioned this to my staff, we'd received this brief to do this research, they go, what? We're going to ask people about death and dying and what they're going to buy? And I said, yes, we are, because the reality of the mausoleum is that it would be servicing predominantly an Italian Melbourne community. It would be really understood by the Calabresi, the Sicilians, the Baresi, and and then when we actually did the research, we did it in such a way that we actually did it in dialect with people. In dialect. It's the first time it's ever been done in Australia, research in dialect, okay? So what's my point about that? My point about that is that the sensitivity that we might have from our cultural baggage might be totally irrelevant to someone else. So what we were able to say to that council, build that mausoleum, use this type of granite, allow 3 tiers, and these are the price points that people will buy into. And they said, thank you very much. It was built and they came. So the point being as well, you do not know what that sensitivity is because naturally you have to actually find it out. You have to talk to people, you have to engage with people. So that's what happened here. There were forums, there were discussions, there were round tables. Where do we position incontinence or continence in these communities? What are the potential barriers? How do we position information? And what you start crafting then is a series of appropriate messages, is a series of normalisation. And more than that then, once you understand the register, then it allows you to then put together what the approach is, if you like, then the tactics of the strategy. Do you use media? Do you use online? Do you use a public affairs approach? How do you actually engage? And I think it's at that level we are now here. We have had an ongoing process of these materials, which are going to be shown to you today, which has actually positioned itself saying, the budgets aren't big here, so you're not going to be doing a big public health campaign relevant to everything in the community. Therefore, if the budgets aren't big, and we know that this issue is potentially sensitive and needs to be understood and validated from in the community, then what we do is develop materials which actually sit along a continuum which requires intermediaries to be the face. So these materials are perfectly positioned to have a worker in the community to say, this is what's available. These materials are perfectly positioned to have a GP with a specific language cohort clientele be able to utilise them to explain issues to their clients. It makes sense. It does make sense. So my belief is that the approach is relevant, it's considered, it's strategic, and its tactics make sense in this area. That's probably where I want to stop. From FECA though, and I'd like to say this formally, and I'm now going to say it for the next couple of months, I'm nearing the end of my term. I finish off as the chair of FECA in October, and I can only thank the organisations which have worked with me to create what I believe is a really growing wave of change around this area of legitimisation of issues to do with diversity. Not in terms of we want, we need, but in terms of if we want a cohesive, long-term, informed society we want to live in, it has to actually understand itself. And in understanding itself, it has to appreciate its diversity. And in appreciating this diversity, it will be the place we all want to continue to live. Now, I look forward right now to the really positive results of this campaign. I commend you guys, Rowan, Nevers, Barry, for the fantastic work you've done, and I'm honoured, absolutely honoured, to be asked to be here today at its launch.